Evening all, welcome to another Kingscrusher radio show. It's nearly 9 on Tuesday night, just after Hobby City, one of my favourites. Now we're going to continue this week looking at the best of the best from the 1950s actually. What confused me, by the way, was the Byrne brothers. Bobby Fischer has an absolutely iconic game against two of the Byrne brothers, and one happened in 1950 and actually heads the best of the 1950s. And 10 years, well, in the 60s he plays his brother. He played Donald Byrne in the 1950s and Robert Byrne in 1963, and that slightly confused me actually, that bit of trivia for you. So we're going to continue part 2 of the 1950s now, the best of the best, going back. And this was of course the era of Mikhail Tal, who in 1960 became world chess champion. Now Mikhail Tal is actually one of my favourite all-time players. He has a very dynamic, aggressive and kind of speculative, sometimes sacrificial style, but he really was an audience pleaser. So this is in the candidates tournament of 1959, just the year before the World Championship match with Mikhail Botvinnik. So this is against Vasily Smyslov in the candidates. This was absolutely grueling candidates. I think they played every player played each other 4 times. Really grueling tournament. I think Fischer might have said something that the Russians might have agreed a few draws with each other just to save their energy for Fischer. So it was a good training ground for Fischer, who was also in this tournament. But let's have a look at this game. Okay, we're going to add a Gabitza. By the way, on the subject of Fischer against the Russians, there is a book I'd recommend which my good friend Kostas Karyonis gave me a while back. The Russians versus Fischer. It's actually a really interesting book with very nice annotation style. I'm not looking at that for tonight's games, by the way, but I will add a Gabitza, and we'll be looking with live book as well at this game. So Tal playing white, e4, and we have Smyslov playing the Karakan. Now instead of d4, it's interesting, Tal chooses d3, which seems contradictory to his kind of attacking, aggressive style to play d3. Isn't this a bit quiet, this move? But it keeps a lot of latent energy in the white position. We see d5, knight d2, and now Smyslov maybe is encouraged by white's play and just seizes the centre. It seems quite natural to seize some central control here, or occupation rather. That pawn is attacked. Now we have knight d7, protecting the pawn. And there's a very interesting move already in this position, which you might think is a little counter intuitive. It's in fact, it's the top engine choice as well in the position, which gives white, it seems, a small advantage. I don't know how many of you have seen this game before. Can you guess white's play as an opening move? Because we're in the opening. What would you play as white, given the history of this game? What do you think is a good move for white? Is it to just get along with things and play bishop e2? Or is it something else? White's play. So I don't usually test you on opening choices, but this is actually kind of an interesting position from an opening perspective. It seems in Livebook, and this is contradictory to Livebook, there's 43 games in chess-based Livebook with g3, which seems to be the natural follow-up. But it's only given an evaluation of equal. It actually gives a small advantage even in Livebook with one with 11 games, which is actually to move the pawn again. d4, and this is the engine choice, to move this pawn again. to me, it's an interesting thing, because we're sort of taught not to move pieces twice in the opening. But is a pawn a piece? It actually guarantees more scope for the pieces, doesn't it? It opens up this bishop, and there's a commitment actually as well. Is White really committed to castling kingside? If we look at the main line here, which most people seem to play routinely as g3, there's a commitment made to castle kingside, and this is thought to be just equal. If we look at this position, if we're lying in this bed to sleep in it all night, we're just equal here. Or even it reckons black is the one that might be slightly better, and why not? Black has as much occupation of the centre and a strong point on e5, and seems to have a fairly comfortable position. So Tal is already, he's kind of violating this idea of moving a piece twice, if you include pawns as pieces, by playing d4. But why is this so interesting? There's a lot of central tension created here. Let's see, like a routine move, say bishop d6. This wasn't played. Let's have a look. E takes, c takes. In fact, black ends up with a dreaded, potentially dreaded, isolated queen's pawn in this position. If we look at here, White should get some small edge actually from this continuation, where structurally, yeah, there's an isolated queen's pawn here. White's quite comfortably blockading that. This kind of scenario is resulting from bishop d6. So that's interesting. And if we don't play bishop d6, I think it could be even worse. If here that looks as though it's just asking for trouble, we can just potentially just take on e5 here. So yeah, what does actually black do here after d4? It's surprising. Has it sort of taken black off guard? Well, he took on e4, but this actually activates this knight centrally, and look at the bishops, they're blasting. They're on fire, these bishops, both of them. So it looks to be quite promising, this moving a pawn twice. White's got a very active looking position here and hasn't committed to castling kingside. He might actually castle on queenside potentially. And in fact, with the pressure on e5, what can black do about this pressure on e5? It's awkward. He wants to be able to castle at some point. If he plays something like this, this looks like asking for trouble. Even if this just looks asking for trouble with the queen congesting the bishop, White could just, yeah, it's just too much. So black actually is activating White further after e takes d4. We have an active queen now in the centre, bearing down on g7. It's the game continuation. Knight f6, and already it's kind of tempting to play knight d6 check here to win that bishop, but this might not be enough of an advantage. Knight d6 wasn't played. Bishop takes, say, black might actually be okay after queen b6, it seems. There's a threat of queen takes and knight e4, I believe. So if bishop e2, bang, queen takes f2, knight e4 check, for example. So I think after queen b6, White has to tread carefully, even though he's won that dark square bishop. But it should be okay with an accurate move. It's still a small advantage for White. But anyway, Tal wasn't interested in knight d6. It's tempting to get that dark square bishop, but he didn't do that. He played bishop g5, and he's actually got the option now of castling queenside. So we have bishop e7, and he uses that option. So this all stems from a very interesting counterintuitive move, which modern engines actually like, this d4, even though the pawn had moved earlier. Modern engines like it, and there's a contradiction, an anomaly, because usually Livebook does indicate what seems to be the strongest moves as well as the most popular, but not on this occasion. It seems Tal's choice in the opening technically is the strongest. So, okay, black castled kingside. And it's here we have that move knight d6. So black is not obliged to take that. It's bearing down pressure on f7 though. And there might be a follow-up based on either f7 or things like knight f5 actually as well. And the queen switching over here is quite dangerous. Black reacted with queen a5, which stops that knight f5. That would actually seem to be the most dangerous threat anyway. And he's also potentially hitting this pawn. That's protected now. But this begs the potential to look at least, the forcing tempo gainer, which is actually used. And it's here, it's kind of interesting here that with the queen on d4, white could actually get in big trouble if he just humbly retreated the bishop to protect the pawn because of c5 and then c4 coming. So actually he didn't do this. This position is troublesome, to say the least. He didn't do that. He dropped the bishop, actually, this one. He dropped this bishop to d2 to hit the queen. And we have queen a6. And still this theme repeats here that if bishop b3, c5, with the idea of c4. Yeah. And if knight takes, just to threaten, knight takes e7, just this, and then we still got c4 coming, and that would be that'd be a winning position for black. So basically, this is a very interesting position where bishop b3 runs into c5. So it limits white's choices actually. These forcing sequence available to black limit white's choice here. So white's play in this position. White's play, what would you play with white? I'll give you 20 seconds here. More than 5 seconds because this is live and there's a stream delay, by the way. So white's play in this position. So you're aware now of these dangers. If you go into... pardon me. So queen a6, this is the position. Queen a6. What would you play with white? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to show what happened. Knight f5 actually hits the bishop on e7. Seems fair enough. The bishop goes to d8. And now, would you expect bishop b3? Actually, on bishop b3, funny enough, I think we still have the same theme of c5. We still have that theme running through here. And it is dangerous for white to allow that. White actually here chose something else. White's play. These are very interesting technical moves actually to make the most out of opportunities. Okay, white actually played queen h4, and this facilitates quite a few things actually. For example, knight takes g7 could be very dangerous because this bishop now can potentially come to this diagonal. So there are things like that going on as threats if it was white's play in this position. But it's black's play. He did nab this bishop. And you might think, well, hang on, what about knight takes g7 here? In this position, queen takes a2 threatens mate. And if here, this is actually favourable, it seems, to black. Yeah, I think white is losing the plot here and losing his king. There's no There's no escape for the king soon. It's not enough time to mate black. But so b takes c4 is playing an interesting part there of things. Nevertheless, knight takes g7. If it was white to move, knight takes g7 would be the threat. Just to show that, by the way, if here knight takes g7 would be a killing idea. Here, this whole stuff. Let's slow it down. Knight f5, and already it's the one that getting mated is the black king, because of queen g5 and queen g7. So it's actually crucial for black to set up counterplay in that manner, with the queen coming and trying to mate the white king, and it's precision timing. Actually, this is just absolutely winning, it seems, for white. If here it's precision timing, bishop c3, threatening knight h6, checkmate. So they're both potentially at each other's throats in this position. But b takes c4 just about gives black time to parry by creating a mating net of his own. Knight takes g7, but it did really exist as the clear and imminent threat. The top one in this position was knight takes g7, absolutely. But it's parried with b takes c4. White has to choose something different here, which is faster, much faster than knight takes g7. And he chooses queen g5, which is very fast because it's threatening a mate in 1. Now, here, if black plays g6, he didn't play g6. It seems as though there's at least enough for white to draw, either like this, and if king h8, then bishop c3 is winning for white, because there's a threat of rook takes d7 and bishop f6 mating. So for example, bang, rook takes d7, and then we've got bishop takes f6 mate. It doesn't matter about the check there. Yeah, it's going to be mating on f6. So anyway, it would be enough for a draw on g6 in this position if black had played g6. Draw with best play, it seems. But black played knight h5, and we have now knight h6 check, king h8. Queen takes h5, very sharp position. White is threatening now knight takes f7 check. Black took on a2, which again seems to be defending via counterattack, threatening mate himself, mate in 1. White gives his king an escape square and simultaneously pins that pawn. And there are new threats in this position with this configuration. If white can get this move in, that back row is echoed as being potentially weak. Okay, but it's black to play. He played knight f6, and this is where actually it's a knight f6 might actually be the first big mistake of the game. Up until this point, black's play was enough for equality. If he had played bishop f6, it seems black might have enough to stay in the game, but it is pretty sharp. But that seems to be the most technically accurate move. So knight f6 was played, which allows something quite special now. White's play in this position, white's play, if I give you 20 seconds, white's play in this position, what would you play? Any ideas? Okay, now if you've said rook takes d8, doesn't quite work with this check apparently. And then it's check here. Rook takes d8 is check. And in fact, black can be carnivorous and just take on h1. Apparently he's not getting mated. There's too many resources now, like queen c1 check. And check here to move out the firing line. And there's too many checks. Yeah, the king shouldn't be there in the centre of the board. And it's all over for white. Yeah, black has enough to defend himself. So yeah, rook takes d8 is not sufficient here because of this check. No, he played actually the strongest move in the position, which is queen takes f7. And this threatens, well, it threatens queen takes f8 immediately. And if it's taken, it wasn't taken, but then we have rook takes d8 check and mating with a smothered mate, or with rook takes g8. So that back row is exposed as being weak after queen f7. And also you can factor in, no, you can't factor in immediately queen g8. The principal threat is queen f8. Okay, so black played queen a1 check, and after king d2 we see actually the rook hitting the queen as well as this queen hitting that rook. And it doesn't really matter what black does here. He actually took on f7. If black takes on d1, this position ends up in this fork, bishop and king, and white's material up, piece up. So that doesn't help queen takes d1. So black played rook takes f7, and now we have knight takes f7 check. And then white took the queen. After takes check. White has a winning position here because he's the exchange up. We have two rooks and a knight and bishop against, yeah, he's the exchange up. And also he's a pawn up at the moment. We have check, check, and here even stronger actually than takes, which allows bishop b7. Tal actually played the stronger move, bishop d4, and it's here black resigned. This is putting a lot of pressure on black, threatening to take because of that pin. And if black played on, he didn't, but if he took, it's just hopeless. The exchange down here, well, more than the exchange down, losing that piece is actually just like winning a piece there on bishop takes. So black would have to do something to address bishop takes b6, and the knight has to play knight c5. It's just winning for white. Knight e5, threatens knight takes c4, and it's just hopeless. I'll follow this through a bit. It's just the exchange up anyway for white. It should be quite easy to convert that. So anyway, it wasn't tested there. This is the final position, bishop d4. So Smyslov resigned. So yeah, in this game Mikhail Tal moved the pawn twice. He seemed to almost violate a basic opening principle, but it seems fully justified. It gave white greater flexibility to castle on the queen side. That licensed the castle queen side. His bishop seemed really active during the game. He didn't have to commit to a fianchetto or anything, which the second move might have portrayed as if it was like a fianchetto system. No, none of that. It became an ultra sharp game, and later he avoided these big tempo gains that were available theoretically by sacrificing a piece and just went for black's king in a dramatic way. So very interesting, sharp game there, showing how Tal's really the master of the dynamic game. I hope you got something from that game. Let's go on to another great game from the 60s now. So Tal went on to win the candidates to challenge Botvinnik and He beat Botvinnik in the 1960 match. Unfortunately, at the time, I think health concerns, they weren't so worried about drinking loads of alcohol and smoking loads of cigarettes, and Tal ended up looking a bit aged for his age later on and not in great health, and he had numerous health issues, and perhaps he shouldn't have even played so quickly the rematch against Botvinnik, but the rematch was not so great for Tal fans. Yeah, he lost to Botvinnik, so Botvinnik regained his crown again, and then Tal became known as like the Christmas King or something, not the Winter King, just 1 year. But nevertheless, such a fantastic, dynamic, aggressive player. And many years, even later, after, like, from 60s to 70s, Tal was really up there on the rating list anyway, like in the 2700s even like years later. But it was influenced a lot, I believe, by his health, general health, status. His play was often influenced by that, in my view. So, okay, this game next. Averbakh against Kotov. Yuri Averbakh. I'm just going to put it in. So, Yuri Averbakh against Kotov. D4. Sorry, these are games of the 50s, yeah. This is 1953. Yuri Averbakh against Kotov. 1953. In the Zurich Candidates Tournament. 1953. Now, Kotov, let's take Kotov's perspective. Knight f6, c4, we have d6. So, old Indian startup to this game, because black just quickly prepares e5 without bothering with g6. And we get the bishop here instead of trying to feed chateau. Both sides castle, c6, queen c2, rook e8, rook d1, bishop f8. Black doesn't usually want to release the tension here because he's going to end up with this painful pawn on d6. So he leaves that. And white doesn't really want to take here because he's going to give black ultimately the c5 square and liberate this bishop. So tension is kept by both sides here. We have a5 here to discourage b4. d5, white closes the central position and tries to lock in this bishop. Knight c5, hitting, well, putting pressure on e4. I don't think there's any immediate threat. We have bishop e3, queen c7, h3, bishop d7, rook bc1. Some manoeuvring from both sides, but it seems to transpose into some sort of King's Indian defense now style position. Knight takes, queen takes, black closes the queen side. Now that there's stability in the center and on the queen side, this is riper conditions to launch a pawn storm on the king side. So black prepares a pawn storm, knight g8, and bishop g4. Knight h6. Bishop takes d7, queen takes, queen d2, hitting knight on h6. Knight moves back, g4 clamping down. But black plays f5 anyway here. We have f3, bishop e7, rook g1. There's quite a bit of manoeuvring here. G takes, rook g2, f4 closing the king side it seems. Rook f6. But the problem here for white is actually he has got a potential target. And in fact black might have a big threat in this position after rook f6. Quite a naughty one already. Might do. Or does he? Is the time right at some point? We have moved knight e2. Does black have a big threat or not? And can you calculate it or not? So this is the interesting position now at move 30. And I believe there's something about this game. This is move 30. I'm not entirely sure when the adjournment was. It might have been move 40. But if you know at move 30 that the adjournment's at move 40, and you think you can play a combination which at least draws and might give you prospects of winning, then it might be interesting to indulge in it if it's like minimal risk anyway. It might be one of those cases where, in fact, at least the draw was calculated and that was good enough here. So if you know when in those days they didn't have the entire game over the board. There was, I believe, adjournments in this, and that might seem strange today, but they didn't have computers back then, so no one was going to put computers to work or anything. But I guess having good seconds and stuff is handy in these circumstances. So here, black to play. Okay, what would you play with black then? So black to play here. Okay. 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 Black played queen takes h3 check. So maybe this is a good advert of Kotov's book, Think Like a Grandmaster, because it is a very calculation-heavy move. What was required to be calculated, though, given that there was an adjournment at move 40? Okay, if king g1, let's rule this out. This is no good because of rook h6. That's just going to be winning that. So the king is drawn out. King hunts. Check. And now we have check. The king's brought out to f5. And now we have knight d7. And there's a mate in free threat of rook f8 check. Rook g8 check, and if the king went back, then rook f6 would be checkmate. So there's a mate in free. Let's have a look at that on the board. Token move. Check. So this rook's guarding e6. Check to bring the king back. And now we've got this rook cutting off the king's g4 escape. And while that's happening, rook f6 checkmate. So white has to address that. And he addressed it with rook g5, which at least shields the king, it seems, on the g file. So rook f8 check was played, and it seems the king's at least shielded on that g file. But here, knight f6 check brings that king back. And this is what I mean. There's even if you can't calculate it all to the end, you can at least guarantee a draw here if you wanted with knight d7 check, because you could seesaw the king with a draw if you wanted. But okay, we're approaching move 40. We have knight g8 check instead, and in fact black repeats for a moment, but it's here that black varies. Black took on d5, and it still seems as though there's a perpetual check, by the way. He's just taken off a centre pawn, and he's still got this apparent perpetual check, and he's testing it this way again. Check, check, and it's in this position after he's taken out one pawn. It's in this position that this is after move 40 now, so he could have done some in-depth research on this with his seconds. So black to play here. So black to play here. What would you play in this position? Do you just carry on checking or anything else? Well, okay. The pieces intuitively look as though they're not really helping the king over here. So black actually drew the king out with bishop takes g5. And now played rook f7, threatening a mate in 2. Now with check, and this would be mate knight e7. Just put that on the board with a token move. Check, and knight e7 is checkmate. Or, in fact, rook f6 is checkmate as well. So white has to avoid that. And white played bishop h4 on move 45. But now, this leads to trouble anyway. I'm not sure white can do anything here in particular. So this is hopeless anyway. Check. And now black played. Can you guess what black plays in this position? Black's playing to set up a mating net. Okay, I hope you can. Rook fg7 just sets up the mate in 1 threat, because this rook then is cutting the escape squares, while that rook is delivering the checkmate, helped by the knight protecting it. We have now white trying bishop g5. That's just taken. And here another mate threat is set up with knight f6, threatening rook h5 checkmate. So white desperately tries to defend that with the only resource available to defend against rook h5, which is knight g3. Yeah, which is putting the piece, I think, where it could be taken. That is taken. And black is simply threatening now a mate in 2 with, say, this one coming here for this mate, or this one coming here for this mate. Either rook will do, as long as the fellow rook cuts the escape squares. They can work together like that. Those evil rooks, brothers in crime there. White took on d6 in this position, and yeah, but both methods. Actually, black could play rook g2 here, or what he did, which is this one. He chose this one, so threatening this mate. We have check, and rook g8. White's like a piece down if he takes. So actually he resigned here. Yeah. Okay, I mean it is an impressive game, but maybe there wasn't a German element. I think it's quite clever how it wasn't as risky as it seemed. The queen sack, as long as there was at least a draw calculated, it could work out the details later of the story, I think. But yeah, an impressive game for Kotov fans. And that book, Think Like a Grandmaster, has become an iconic book by Kotov. And it seems to foresee the future, really, about how chess computers would become much stronger than humans. So he bypassed it wasn't even how grandmasters fought, it was more like how computers fought, and he was trying to sort of say, well, computers are going to take over in the future, so grandmasters might as well try and get more discipline to be like computers. It was like, I guess, a visionary kind of book, not really the title of the book. It was almost like a future proofing of how grandmasters might be influenced in the future by computers. But this game can't really be used 100% as evidence of his fantastic calculation, because as I say, this is a lot about risk management in this game. He guaranteed a draw before the adjournment with his rook queen sack, guaranteed. So I sorry, I can't help but say what I think is objective about this game. There wasn't that much of a risk given the circumstances of the game, as far as I'm aware. Okay, I hope that anyway you got something from this book, and check out the book Think Like a Grandmaster. It is well worth getting. It is one of the iconic must-read books in chess literature. So Kotov's Think Like a Grandmaster. It did fascinate me, and a lot of the stuff is very, very, very useful today about candidate moves, trees of analysis, looking at forcing variations and stuff, different types of tree structure. But yeah, it was like a visionary book, sort of forecasting, the rise of computers and how they might impact people's style of play. Really, trying to take the best that at least that we could as humans from that style of computer thinking. Almost, that's what it seems like to me. But an opposite book, if you much more intuitive, would be like Nimzovich's My System. And there's a cartoon video I have on my channel which take these two opposites. I'll give you the link on the stream at least. To this debate video. So this is extra reading, extra video content if you want to check it out. But Kotov's highly influential, and here's the cartoon if you want to check it out. It turns out actually one of the cartoon characters really does look like Kotov. Yeah. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this week. Comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated, and see you next week. Okay. Thanks so much.